Thank you, Mr. CEO. Good afternoon, everybody. It is, let's see, 2:03 p.m. on November 15th, 2023, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Let's see, the first order of business, public comments. We hear any public comments? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to the consent agenda, I see first item of business would be the minutes. And for the Deployment Committee, September 20th, 2023, anybody have any comments about those minutes? They look okay to everybody? And then the next item on the consent agenda is the Environmental Infrastructure Programs, item 4. Are you talking about that, Brian?
Yes, are we okay with moving the meeting minutes, and then Eric and I will present the next?
Oh, you do want to move, I thought we were going to do consent all at once. Okay. Do I have a motion to move the minutes from September 20th, 2023?
Make a motion to move the minutes.
Thank you. And Bettina, that's a second?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, good. Now, moving on to environmental infrastructure. So I'm guessing that's you, Brian, with some others as well?
Eric and I will tag team on this. We're super excited to be bringing this back to the Deployment Committee. So we'll step back for a second and talk about our flagship single-family residential loan program, which is called the Smart E-Loan. Everyone here is familiar with it. Deputy Commissioner Hodling, I've heard you talk about it, and I'm like, yeah, right, he knows, he's got it. So this is our partnership with our local community banks and credit unions. What we do here is we provide them a second loan loss reserve. We want them to underwrite to their own, regular procedures. So they underwrite to the first 1.5% of losses, and then we take the next 7.5% of losses between various income strata. But it's been really successful. By providing the loss reserve, we essentially establish not to exceed interest rates. Bert, I forgot when we went to the board to adjust those interest rates up given the rising interest rate environment, but you can see our, for example, 5-year term went from 4.99 to 5.99, and then our 20-year term went from 6.99 to 7.49. So we've moderated those a bit just given the rising interest rate environment, trying to keep our lenders happy, keep the cost of capital down. These are unsecured loans. So we have through June of this year supported over 7,500 projects, nearly $150 million in loans to our families and through the Smart E-Loan. Nearly 90% of those projects have energy efficiency as a component to them. So this is really like our flagship residential product. So I wanted to take us back a little bit because Deputy Commissioner Hodling and Deputy Commissioner Webster arrived at our May meeting this year, May of 2023. And it may also be, Bettina, that you arrived a little bit after this conversation here back in November of 2022. So we have a small group of us interagencies that we call the collaborators. That includes the insurance department, the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, and DEEP. And we really came together from a project, the U.S. Climate Alliance project, where back in 2020, the USCA solicited from all its member states. They had received funding to provide technical assistance to states on resilience. And I remember Dr. Rebecca French from DEEP worked super hard on one weekend to put together a quick proposal. They ended up selecting we were one of 4 states selected around the country. And these projects are to share best practices from European Union countries. So the project was facilitated by a group called Climate Finance Advisors. So they came in and facilitated 4 different conversations with EU representatives around things like public policy, the science of resilience, floodproofing, all these different ways that they're approaching resilience. We had some really interesting results come from it. It really helped us understand our interagency dependencies. But from it, we continued working on a number of various other projects. We currently have a project supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, where we received a $230,000 grant to support essentially what are resilience hubs conceptually today. So we're continuing to work together. But one part of the project that we worked on was what measures could be supported through the Smart E-loan that would stand up our climate adaptation and resilience definition within environmental infrastructure. So we continued on with WSP, which was the contractor for the USCA project. The Connecticut Green Bank engaged in a contract directly with WSP to continue this interagency collaboration around measures. So we identified 82 different measures that are classified in 5 different categories for climate adaptation and resilience. Each of our agencies, along with Inclusive Prosperity Capital, the nonprofit that helps us administer the Smarty loan, looked at all those different measures. You could imagine the definition of those measures, what's done, what's the useful life of the measure, what's the likely cost of the measure. We did all of that work with WSP. 31 of those measures had unanimous consent. All of our agencies were like, yes, makes sense, should be on the list, which means that we have 51 other measures that we're probably going to take a look at because some of them are starting to pop up in our conversations with other agencies. But anyways, we brought those 31 measures to then the SAFER group. SAFER is an interagency group called State Agencies for Resilience. I think it is coordinated by CIRCA and OPM. So our colleague Joanna over at OPM and John Trusinski, who presented to our board at the last meeting, and then just a number of other state agencies, DEMIS, obviously DEEP Insurance, DOT, a lot of us are in that monthly group. They took a look at it and were like, okay, yeah, those 31 measures make sense to us. Then before Dr. French went on maternity leave last November, she said, you know what, it would be good if we also had FEMA take a look at our list and give us the gold star stamp of approval that, yeah, these measures make sense. So what we ended up doing was putting into the resolution for the deployment committee, the second, actually the first area highlighted here in yellow, that the deployment committee requests that the collaborators seek a final review by FEMA for how climate adaptation and resiliency measures may benefit insurance. And George from our Department of Insurance, who works on behalf of Commissioner Mays, gave me the big thumbs up, said FEMA reviewed the measures. They thought they were good. They're going to lift up resiliency in the state. So we're good there. The second area that's highlighted here in yellow was essentially the guidance that the deployment committee gave to us to come back to them before we could launch these measures, which was that the deployment committee seeks review and approval of a plan for the staff rollout of environmental infrastructure measures within the Smart E-loan, including but not limited to contractor participation, project inspections, loss reserve budgeting, and customer marketing and outreach. So Eric is going to go into those in a second. Then we had the meeting where Deputy Commissioner Hodeling and Webster, this was their first meeting. So they arrived as we were presenting another component of our environmental infrastructure measures, which were around water. So we began to engage, actually we engaged a consultant called Quantified Ventures, which is a firm that looks at nature-based solutions, resilience, water issues, super knowledgeable around state revolving funds, clean water revolving funds, drinking water revolving funds, to develop that priority list. We vetted, ran those measures by our collaborators here, DEEP, Department of Public Health, and the Treasurer's Office. Bettina, you might remember the meeting we had with Kimberly and Sarah. Oh, it feels like a long time now, but it was about a year ago. So we then brought forward those measures in May, and similar a resolution. except there was additional work here that the deployment committee wanted with respect to some of these measures. You could think of things like septic tanks along the coast with coastal intrusion, groundwater intrusion. There might be some things that we need to think about regulatorily and have an interaction with our state agencies to help us think that through. So the first resolved here in yellow is that we would engage members of the board and the deployment committee, those who wanted to engage this way, with state agency staff to understand the linkages between these measures, policies, regulations, and other relevant features. And I think the point of conversation here was around, let's just make sure that the measures we are looking to approve and be supportive through the Smarty loan are lifting up our public policies and not running into or creating problems down the line. So that was the basis. We'll talk about how we're going to propose handling that in a second. And then the second resolved, of course, comes back to us needing to present the contractor participation, project inspections, loss reserve budgeting, and customer marketing and outreach, which leads me to then transitioning to Eric, who's going to walk us through that three-part phase plan.
So, well, thank you, Brian. So we've looked at the new measures and we've really split these into, we'll call it 2 phases for right now, 2 phases plus more to come later. But we're focusing on the near term with phase 1, phase 1A, and phase 2. So from basically phase 1 and phase 1A are all measures that are adjacent to existing clean energy measures. So think of things like wiring associated with installation of a battery, or the rewiring homes for backup circuits, or resilient windows, things like that. We already do windows in Smarty from an energy efficiency standpoint. So they don't necessarily require new contractor networks. So that's what we're focusing on those first. In phase 1A, some of the measures are more electrician driven as opposed to HVAC or home performance driven. So we want to have a little bit more time to work with our existing electricians and build out that network a little bit more. Phase 2 is going to require recruiting and training a new network of contractors. We have plans to leverage industry organizations and also issue a request, an open RFP for new contractors, inviting them into the program, similar to what we did in the early days of the RSIP. Next slide. So inspections, the next area that this committee asked us to update them on. So for phase 1A and phase 1, we can leverage our existing inspector network. Phase 2, we need new inspectors. Our existing inspectors, some might be familiar with some of the plumbing work, some may be familiar with some of those measures, but we really need to make sure that our inspector network has the familiarity and depth with the measures to the same extent or greater than the contractors. So we'll be issuing a new RFP for inspectors in February to support the new areas. Next slide. Loan loss reserve budgeting. So this really comes down to 3 points I want to highlight here. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the way that Smarty works, all the loans are underwritten and provided by our network of lenders. We are simply there for a credit enhancement on those. So we basically are insurance on the loan. If we have a second loss reserve, we have a great track record of not hitting that in terms of loan performance. But to make this work with the new measures, there are a couple things that we need to take in mind. First, statutorily, we can't use Clean Energy Fund money to support the new measures. So we're going to technically need a separate loan loss reserve for this. So to keep the money segregated, we're going to set up a separate loss reserve. It's going to be the same processes, the same methods of estimation, and for funding that loss reserve in terms of percentage of loan, We'll do that the same. It'll just be in a separate bank account earmarked for the new measures or the environmental infrastructure related measures for Smarty. In terms of budgeting specific for this fiscal year, we're setting a target of 100 loans for the new measures and a loss reserve of 20K. That's in line with those budgeting methodologies that I mentioned earlier in terms of getting to that 20K. So on to customer marketing and outreach. One of the great things about Smarty is it's primarily contractor driven in terms of how projects come to us. So our intent for phase 1 and phase 1A is to leverage our existing contractor network. We're going to have a heavy focus on contractor outreach and education to make sure that everybody's aware of the new measures, making sure that we're updating marketing material. We realized that with some certain subsets of our contractor network, we may need to do some more education around offering financing. Electricians don't often offer financing. So this is on our notes of things that we need to keep in mind. We're going to lean on our lenders. We're going to leverage them to reach their members, their customers, making them aware of Smarty in general, as well as the new measures. We have a new position on our team who's focused solely on homeowner outreach and is there to answer questions, do some targeted events, targeted campaigns around that. And then, as I mentioned, targeted campaigns, we're leveraging data to identify areas and communities with specific needs and creating campaigns to reach them. We have a couple of things in the hopper here that I'll say are still percolating, but I think there's going to be some interesting things that'll come out of this as we start to roll out the new measures. So what does the rollout plan look like? Phase 1 and phase 1A, we're aiming for early in 2024. So for phase 1, these are, as I mentioned, these all complement existing Smarty measures. We know the contractors in the space. We're familiar enough with the technology. We can easily identify criteria to qualify for a loan. So it's 9 measures. We have one additional one that we'll bring on board sometime between January and April. I don't think it's that much of a stretch. This is, I think we're comfortable with the technology. We're comfortable with the contractors. I think there's just a little bit more contractor education that we want to keep in mind there. Phase 2, we're targeting for April through June. Right now, we're developing contacts from the ground up. We're building those relationships. This is 19 measures that include things like septic and some landscaping, some I need to go back and look at my actual chart to remember what all is in there. And then finally, phase 3 will aim for fiscal 25. So sometime after June. And these are measures where we really need more input and we need to we need a little bit more definition, let's say. So there are 4 measures that are targeted for that phase 3, the TBD down the road. And I think there's probably more to come just based off of conversations we've had around the office and with other agencies. And that'll be part of that ongoing review and coordination across state agencies. All right. So that brings us to the resolution. Are there any questions or concerns?
Yeah, this is Bettina. Maybe I missed it, but you said, can you explain again the part where you talked about you needed a different cash stream to fund the reserves, and how much are we talking about?
Yes. So as you're aware, we get our 1 mil on the Clean Energy Fund, and we can't use those utility customer receipts, the 1 mil as it comes in directly into the Smarty loan. It has to be funds that are generated through other means or through interest earned off of projects, things like that. So we currently have multiple bank accounts. We have one for our incoming utility money. We have others that are where we receive interest coming off of our projects. Reggie money, I believe, is in its own bank account. This is where I become dangerous. But basically what we're saying here is that the current loan loss reserve for the existing clean energy measures is a reserve that's within the bank account on the clean energy fund monies that's coming in from the utilities. What we're saying we're going to do for these new measures is have a separate reserve that functions in exactly the same way, that is just calculated off of the number of loans done for new measures that sit, or environmental infrastructure measures that sits in the environmental infrastructure bank account.
And do you have a handle on what the dollar amount would be?
So we're estimating $20,000 for this fiscal year for that new loss reserve.
Okay.
So we're not talking huge money.
And would it scale up over time to?
Yeah, so this is
what are you
based,
estimating would scale up to?
oh, it totally depends on the volume of the loans done.
Yeah, we're kind of in a learning pattern, but I think last year, Bettina, we did about 1,200 loans in the Smarty program, about $25 million of volume. Over the program, 7,500 loans, 140 million. We've had $75,000 in losses that we've had to pay out. So that's why Eric was kind of knocking on, because we've had a really good loss protection here. I think, the first year we're going to be learning what measures are people interested in, how are we accounting for them, what's the impact of those metrics as we roll out phase 2. Okay, what types of measures are we seeing? So we're being very calculated in terms of rolling it out.
Okay, and I ask, you can probably guess why I'm asking. I'm just wondering if you're taking monies away from funds that would otherwise be used as coverage for any existing scarf-backed debt.
Good question. Jane or Bert? I see Jane or Bert on. That's kind of a really good pointed. There's Jane. Perfect.
The money we have for the scarf-backed bonds is coming in from Schreck's, and it's maintained in a separate indenture. So those are meant to be self-funding. Yeah,
Okay.
So it's completely different funding sources.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, sorry to be late, everyone.
No problem. Good to see you, Matt.
Nice to see everybody.
We discussed the 3-phase rollout that we talked with you about, and just have the resolution for phase 1 and 2 here, and then giving us time to come back on phase 3.
Okay.
This is Lonnie. I just have a question. During our local elections here, one of the big issues seems to be that our sewage treatment plant, it will soon be underwater. And there's a whole bunch of issues involving, the closing beaches because of bacterial infections that have to do with overflows and overruns. And so we can't be the only town experiencing that. And I'm just wondering if there's any initiative within this. I think we touched on this a couple of meetings ago, but I'm just trying to figure out whose responsibility that is, and is that something we're going to get engaged in as well?
So Brian, are you going to take it or?
Give it a go. And I'll
All right. So in terms of the actual sewage treatment plant, that wouldn't be within Smarty.
Okay.
I would defer to Lee on that. In terms of how individual homeowners interact with the waste system in town, there are new measures that would address some of that in terms of septic replacement, new septic systems, or going off of septic into a municipal waste system. So we do have that for the homeowners, but the overall sewage treatment plant that wouldn't fall within this.
and let me add, and Bettina, maybe you can help me out here. I'm not sure if this is there are resources through the state revolving funds to support, infrastructure for water processing, whether that's drinking water or wastewater in this context. I think as climate change starts to set in, we're going to start to your point, Lonnie, be threatened with the need to adapt and make those systems more resilient, given, the excessive flow or stopping the power or, discharge into water bodies. So those larger infrastructure conversations, I suspect, are going to happen in the context of resilience, like kind of think of water investment, and then on top of it, resilience, we're going to have to start thinking about, because our systems are changing, our climatic systems are changing. I don't know, Bettina, if you had anything else on.
Yeah, I can add just a little bit. The state revolving fund has already committed, I don't know the dollar amount off the top of my head, but there is monies that are committed specifically to the north end of Hartford issues. Also lead pipe replacement. I know that there's money that's been dedicated to that.
Yeah, it just feels that this is coming. And,
Right,
and we're
absolutely.
going to need to be a collaborative partner in however
Correct.
all of this is going to be, it's coming big time.
Yeah, and it's always an issue
And
of
it was
where's
bizarre to me,
where's the
to
money
walk
coming
around-
from?
And to walk around my town, I'm no longer the state representative, but people were running up to me. So this
Oh, I
is something that's it's front of mind for a lot of folks who, this is not their main focus in life, environmentalism. And suddenly
Yeah.
they're like, who's going to do?
I know,
So
exactly. No, I know there've been many conversations between our office, DEEP, the MDC, focusing on the issue and the issues in Hartford, the North End.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So do we have any more questions or observations? Do I hear a motion to approve resolution 2?
I'll move it. This is Bettina.
Thank you, Bettina. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it. This is Matt.
Hey, Matt, thank you.
Hello.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, good. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay. Moving on.
So this will be Brian Farnan talking about, actually, I'll let you describe it, Brian. We'll turn it over to you.
So we can go to the next slide. And, the memo in the deployment committee folder mentions staff authorization in 2017, but this goes well back to our old Clean Energy Fund days, where there were the ability for staff to approve authorizations below $300,000. When we came in, Brian and I, we put a little bit more parameters on it and basically said, if you've got, staff can approve of certain projects and authorizations, so long as it's something that's been approved under the comprehensive plan, it's part of an existing program. So you could think like CPACE, for example. And back in 2017, we raised the amount from $300,000 to $500,000. And so if you had two projects of $400,000, they would be below the aggregate cap of $1 million. And then you would do is you bring those to the deployment committee. Deployment committee wouldn't even vote on them. It would clear the queue. And then we would put certain documentation into the folder so that if a board member wanted to review it, they could. And then what would happen is that we would get close to when we were starting to get close to the queue, and there wasn't a deployment committee meeting coming up, we'd say, okay, let's take this to the board, and they'll do it as a consent agenda item for the staff authorization so that we can clear the queue, so that we can continue to have staff authorizations, and this would occur every 2 months, 3 months. And it's gone relatively smooth. The one big issue is that this was kind of like a CPACE centric staff authorization. It was always kind of like, okay, it was, a couple CPACE projects were coming in, but with the establishment of the Energy Storage Solutions Program. This is the pure approved, pure authorized program where the Green Bank could provide these incentives for battery storage systems. We've now seen an issue where you've got CPACE programs, CPACE projects, and now battery storage projects that are getting approved through the staff authorization, through approved programs, to through a pre-approved process. But that $1 million aggregate is becoming an issue. So can we go to the next slide? All right, so the staff recommendation here is, okay, we've got, when you think of CPACE, think of that as financing program. So it's primarily CPACE, but it's, it could be another type of financing program, whether it be a staff authorization. And then when you think of ESS, that is an incentive program, because that's, we only have one incentive program, the Energy Storage Solutions Program. That's our only kind of subsidy-based program. The one before that was the Residential Solar Investment Program, the RSIP, that closed down, and now we're focused on the ESS as our only incentive program. So what we would like to do is basically have two buckets, one for financing programs, one for incentive programs. And this would allow us to avoid this issue of hitting this cap. I know for Sergio's team, they've run up against that cap a few times, and then had delay projects, and have them go for, the next time there was a deployment committee meeting. So we want to clean up the process by doing two things. We want to create two buckets, and then we also want to allow it so that remember I mentioned how at the deployment committee, you just report out, and you don't have to go on the consent agenda, and you just provide certain material. We'd like to do that at the board level too, so that you're not doing a consent resolution at the board, having one consistent approach of a report out with the documentation that we're providing at the deployment committee. This would enable us to continue to approve these relatively smaller dollar projects under $500,000, having the two separate buckets, $1 million for finance, $1 million for incentive programs. Primarily finance is going to be CPACE, primarily incentive is going to be the Energy Storage Solutions Program. And this should avoid this issue of the queue getting stuck by hitting that $1 million cap. So this is our suggestion to bring to the deployment committee as a recommendation for the full board to approve. We could maybe go to the next slide, and then you guys can ask any questions.
I have some questions, Brian. Sorry, I didn't know if you were going to say.
I was just about to call your name, Matt.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, let me start with, all these questions are sort of rooted in my view as a board member that we have, sort of oversight obligations, and that, these are part of our sort of financial controls, which may be misguided or overstated notion, but that's sort of where these comments are coming from. So I think we're all familiar with CPACE. I'm not uncomfortable about how that process worked. And I know you're referring to times that Sergio's bumped up against it, but honestly, I don't know when those times are, or how many, or how frequently, and why we couldn't have had a special meeting. We certainly don't want, or speaking for myself, I don't want to slow down anything in the queue. I mean, that's our opposite of our mission is, we want to get these out, but I just wasn't aware that there were times we were bumping up against it. I'd be curious to know how frequently that was, but I do get that there's been a whole new work stream added through this, especially the ESS incentive, or right now solely the ESS incentive. But by the same token, that's sort of the part of it that I know the least about. And I kind of feel like, I would like it to come to the deployment committee. I mean, that's my preference as we learn about that space. I mean, I think CPACE, we're more familiar with, and it's now become well-traveled territory. But like in the beginning of that, we had a lot of, I think, active discussions about those projects and how they penciled out, and just little idiosyncrasies of the process. I just honestly don't know if it's more formulaic in the ESS space or not. but I personally would like to see them on the, again, maybe misguided belief that we could provide some, oversight and guidance, not certainly supplanting the expertise of the staff who knows way more about it, but just, serving as that second set of eyes. So I, A, would like to keep it with us. B, I wonder if, having, I guess I'd like to hear what you say about how frequently it happens. I mean, do we need to go really from what is a $1 million cap to a $2 million cap? Is there an in-between step, that would address those times that Sergio has bumped up against it? I mean, there's been one or two projects and just adding a couple $100,000 would do it. Like, how much runway do you guys need, or are you finding you're not getting?
Yes, and maybe I should, and I'm probably, from a staff perspective, I'm probably not the best advocate for any kind of additional authorization. I'm probably more take the conservative approach as the compliance person. And I do think your view of board role is spot on, but I do think
Agreed.
Sergio can add a little bit of color on the times where this has been an issue. But I do agree with the staff recommendation that we do need to increase something, like, either if it's not $1 million, if it's going up to 7, if it's creating, going up, I don't know. There's a couple of ways to potentially do it, but I definitely think we need to make some change. But maybe Sergio can. I'll defer to you now.
And
Well,
Sergio,
yes,
I
good
don't need to be convinced. I agree with what Brian said. So I'm just more kind of curious, like, how much runway, using your past experience as a guide, how much runway do you need?
Yes, fair enough. Good afternoon, everyone. Matt, just to address your question, there has been 3 instances where we have hit the cap, and it was one in July of 2022. We had an aggregate approval of $16.5 million. So we went, it was 16 times the cap, right? We went to, I believe we went to the board, right, to request approval. Then we hit it again in November of 2022. This is purely ESS projects. November of 2022, $9.6 million, almost 10 times the cap. And the last time we did it was in July of 2023. It was
But Sergio,
7.4.
are those projects that are above the? I mean, I think you might be including projects that are above the $500,000 amounts, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
So
the
anything
aggregate
above $500,000, if it's a project, if it's an ESS or CPACE project that's over $500,000, those are still going to go to you. This is just for those ones below 500,000.
Right. So those went to us because they were above 500. I'm interested in the times we've had below 500 that bumped up against the aggregate of $1 million.
I don't have the data with me, but I'm sure we've done it before. It's happened before. Not counting any CPACE projects, it's purely ESS projects. We've hit the cap a few times, but I don't have that data with me right now.
Maybe, I mean, if we're going to bring this to the board, we should probably have that data available at that board meeting, and then I'll defer to the deployment committee from there.
My goal would be not to have Sergio ever have to push something over because he hits the cap, but I'd kind of just like to know how we are setting the new cap, and is it the right amount of runway? And again, I'll stop talking. Maybe nobody else, I'm only one. It's only one voice, so I don't want to stand in the way of progress, but it just would be nice to know how big a problem this is, and keep it so we have, I don't know, some, so we can gain some familiarity with that ESS program. And again, maybe the underwriting is so formulaic that we have no role at all, but I just don't know.
This is
Matt,
Bonnie.
I echo your concern, and I too would like to see the patterns and the history on the number of times where it's under 500 and over 500.
This is Lonnie. I agree. I mean, I have to say, and it's been my pleasure to be able to be involved in some of this stuff. But I think the runway question is a good question. Like, how tight are these timelines, and how quickly do they happen, and how quickly do we have to make a decision, or hit the drop dead button? It feels, there's a level of urgency, and sort of just getting a better sense of the rhythms of it, I think, would be helpful. And certainly the members of the full board is going to want to know that.
Okay.
Any more questions? Questions, observations?
Just
This is Brian. Oh, go ahead,
yeah,
Brian.
maybe just a broad comment. Because I feel like I see it when Mackey's advocating for his financing programs to use the million, and Sergio's advocating for his on the other side, right? So, and they'll make trade-off decisions in terms of timing and those sorts of things. There is a component here that we're talking about, which is, I liked how you phrased it, Bettina, patterns in history. We have a lot of that with CPACE. We work through a lot of different things. We've standardized it so the board has a good, solid understanding of that. And we're still trying to work through that in terms of the non-residential energy storage solutions projects. So we might, even though some projects may be less than 500,000, Sergio, we might want to even present a few just to give the board some level of comfort over time of what's happening in these projects. Is it just we look at a number, we approve it, or what do we actually have to do to reach approval, so that we can build that level of comfort to get there? I still feel like if there's something we can do on the cap to lift that number, but to be able to come back with some projects and that kind of regularity on the education side, that it would be useful. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, Lonnie, and I think to sell it, this is positive stuff. These projects are happening. And, this is a whole new lane that we've gotten involved in. So to present it in that context is always incredibly, that's going to be very helpful. Just to say, okay, we have, and guess what? All these, these things are happening, and we're being asked to step in, and that's a good thing, and put it in that context with numbers and runway times and all of that.
Yeah, and it's just, I think, Brian, I was going to hop in and make, I think, the same point you were making, like, regardless of, a good and appropriate discussion about caps and, whether staff should have authority with newer program, but I think fundamentally it's the commingle, whatever everyone deems as the appropriate authority levels. It's the commingling of them that just doesn't make sense that we have now for like two completely separate. It's just the transactions are fundamentally different. So there's no reason why me approving a CPACE transaction should stop. I don't think should stop because I eat up most of the authority with CPACE, should stop Sergio from getting something approved or vice versa. So I think hopefully we could agree on just like some sort of into that commingling of staff authority.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that, Mackie. I agree. I mean, however you guys would want to slice it, but it certainly makes sense. And that's like, even that, I don't know, are those staff approval processes, is it the same personnel handling both the financing and the incentive reviews, or is it different? I mean, it would just be helpful, I think, and this is, maybe I haven't read the materials enough, but it'd just be helpful to understand it. But it does seem like this is just, we have a new program, and the only place we put it was under this old design. So maybe we could have just a resolution that the deployment, well, I'll put it out there. Deployment committee supports a review of the under $500,000 approval process in light of the additional incentive program, and recommends that staff prepare a memo identifying the issues discussed for the board, or however you want to do it. I mean, if that helps move it along, it's just hard to calibrate what the right change is without knowing some of the facts on the ground. But I think the fundamental principles we don't disagree on.
This is Dominic. I just had a question in terms of how was this handled previously with RSIP and other incentive programs? Was that also commingled, or was that?
RSIP was separate, so RSIP never even came under this cap. That was a different program. I mean, the ESS program and the RSIP program are both very, very formulaic. The difference is almost like the level of formula. I mean, the RSIP was smaller dollar amounts. Both were formulaic, but we had a separate kind of authorization and a statutory authorization to run the RSIP program. So that never came into play. The ESS program, which isn't as formulaic because there's still some kind of wrinkles to it, but it is to a large extent.
Yeah, the difference I think between RSIP and ESS is RSIP was solely residential. So you could think smaller projects. You know, I think our average RSIP incentive was maybe $3,000, $4,000. On the residential ESS projects, you know, we're at a cap of $7,500 per project. That may go up with a recent PURA decision, but it's really the non-residential systems where you could get what, Sergio, like a 20 megawatt project or a 5 megawatt. There's so much variability that you're going to get smaller systems that would fall under the 500,000, and then you're going to get large systems that are going to have to be presented to the board that are $2.5 million. So the CNI is super variable, and maybe that's what you're getting at, Matt and Bettina, is that those patterns. You know, just trying to get our arms wrapped around those end use customers on the battery storage side, small and large. You know, what do they look like? But yeah. The commingling is the challenge. But I think that to me, the resolution Matt proposed, I thought was great. Just, you know, put some more things down, some more thinking to help the deployment committee.
Yeah, maybe if Sergio and Mac, if you guys can, and I think I asked this like a week ago, but maybe we had some misconfusion. Like maybe if we could just have an understanding of how many times have we hit this cap? And B, what do we think is the likelihood of hitting the cap as the ESS program expands? Then we could maybe provide that little bit data to solidify that the $1 million bucket each, which is basically doubling the staff authorization, is still the appropriate approach, or whether it's 750. I mean, I would think because a lot of these approvals, I know in both programs can be a little lumpy. We'd probably still want $1 million in each one because there may be times when there's nothing, and then it's like rains and pours in the smaller projects, and they're both kind of through standardized programs. And the ESS is definitely very formulaic. Maybe we just kind of bolster up the deployment committee memo with the feedback we received today.
Yep.
Yeah, we can.
And
do that.
then
In the meantime, I will say for me, if you're bumping up against it between now and the time we can get something approved, I mean, perhaps if you guys see that coming, we can have a special meeting and just clear the.
But that's a
the
tough one
inventory.
though, Matt, because we don't want to bring a special meeting, especially for like like when we bring a special meeting, we want to do that for like a $8 million butterfly deal, or, you know, or big, like not for like a 600,000.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I was just saying,
Ben's willing
as a
to do it. I'll
temporary-
take it.
As a stopgap while we get this fixed. I agree, Brian. We would.
Yeah, as a stopgap.
All right, deal.
Yeah.
Stopgap until
I
we get
appreciate
the
your
right-
willingness to do that today. I'll look like if.
I'm good with
if
that.
Okay.
Yeah, so then we could call a special meeting for transactions between 500,000 and 2.5 million for the deployment committee to work those transactions through if we needed to.
Yeah,
And then
the NRES awards just went out in the last week or two, so people are going to want to. They've been sitting around waiting for months, and now they got this award. They're going to want to start building those solar systems.
Yeah, well, look,
We good, gang? We got the guidance?
So this resolution. I mean, are we doing an amended resolution, or are we thinking this is sufficiently vague enough that we can move forward, or just wait for a special meeting?
I mean, I think it would be helpful to do a modified version of this resolution. If Matt, maybe you, I'm happy to work with you, because I think it would be nice to think that if we do get a couple of things kind of cleared up in before the board meeting, we could then present it there with kind of that additional data that was kind of called out and talked about today about the
I
cap.
could try to restate, I didn't write down, but I can try to restate like the concept, and if everyone's happy with it, if that's all right. All right, what I was thinking was resolve the deployment committee recognizes the addition of the ESS incentive program has put additional strain on the under $500,000 approval process, and recommends staff prepare a memo regarding the advisability of having two separate approval processes for financial projects and incentive projects, and the amount of aggregate of aggregate cap needed in each instance.
Everybody get that?
We'll get it in the note. In the
Okay.
Ariel's great.
So
it's a
do I
lawyer,
hear a
the second
motion
round,
to approve?
It's always more wordy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know.
I hate to ask this question so late, but is 500,000 the right number for the ESS bucket?
Yeah, I was thinking that too, Bettina. Maybe
Maybe we need to see the track record before we set that cap.
Well, that we've been at 500,000. So are you talking about potentially raising it, or?
I don't know.
lower. Yeah. I thought we were going to go to a lower to get comfortable, just kind of like how we got it. But I think as part of the resolution, we will analyze the ESS under 500,000 projects, so you can get a sense of how big they are, how small they are,
Right.
and then wrap our arms around that.
Should this whole thing be tabled until the board meeting? Or
When's our next deployment committee meeting? Oh, I should know this. Why am I asking it? I should know it. Probably February. Month after. February 21st.
Which is my birthday, which is a big day.
Oh, happy birthday.
that's your
Ryan.
birthday? Aw.
If I don't get a happy birthday reminder at that deployment committee, I
How
quit.
about a resolution instead, Brian?
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Sign. Let's
Birthday
sign it.
resolution.
Here it comes. An early gift.
So it's 3 months from now. Mackie, Sergio, like, how are we? By putting more meat on the bones, we'd come back to deployment with more flesh. We would then come with a resolution at that point. If they were comfortable, then we can do a resolution to the board to approve for the April board meeting.
And if we have any emergencies along the way, we'll just do a special.
There we
meeting.
go.
A
There we
special
go.
meeting. There you go.
There we go.
Good.
I
Perfect.
like it.
Could I suggest one other thing? Because I don't want to. Do we want to? When's our next board meeting?
April, you
December 15th.
Do
Oh,
we want to have if we get it all before then, we could have like a 10-minute deployment committee meeting before the board meeting?
I'm up
Does
with
that
that.
help you guys?
That sounds
Or-
good.
8:30 to 9.
I'm just trying to, I don't want.
That's a
you
great
guys to be
idea.
Handcuffed.
I like that. That's good.
When's the board meeting?
December 15th. It's on a Friday.
Okay.
So it starts at 9 a.m.
Yeah. So if we did an 8:30 to 9,
Okay.
good. Love it.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So that's
And I just
Same
won't talk, so
resolution.
we'll finish on time.
all right.
Okay.
All right.
So moving on. Any other business? Hearing none. Do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved by Bettina.
Second.
Thanks, Bettina. Who seconded? In here?
Yeah, second, Matt.
Oh, hey, Matt, thanks. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, the meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye,
Okay,
guys.
Take care.
bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Stop.